Welcome aboard, folks. I'm Steven Malkowich, your captain on this adventure called Ship of Fools. I'm a fool. Lucky for you, I'm not sailing solo. Join me and a boatload of people, all just trying to make sense of this crazy world. It's a fabulous mess, and you're invited. I would like to welcome Warren Mirko, the Executive Director of the Public Land Use Society, to Ship of Fools, where wit meets wisdom. Warren, we're gonna get right into it because there's a lot of things that we want to discuss here. But let's just briefly explain to us what PLUS is, what the Public Land Use Society is, and why it was created, why it came about, and then we'll get into the meat of what we want to talk about.
Well, thanks for having me. It's glad to be here and finally make the time to make it work and participate on your show and talk to your audience.
Thank you.
Glad to help inform them. Public Land Use Society, or PLUS, was started 1 year ago by myself in reaction to those proposed Land Act amendments, which would have authorized co-governance between First Nations and the government of BC over all Crown land. And I saw at the time the public had no interest in that. And when they found out about it, there was a public outrage that led the government to withdraw those amendments to the legislation. And I thought, well, government apologized for the lack of transparency in proposing this massive provincial change to governance over public land, but they didn't say that they take back their desired outcome, which was to do it. And I thought, well, that was a fluke that the public found out. What if this type of thing happens again? So why don't I spin up a society that can hold the government to account for when this type of thing occurs? And I'm going to think bigger than any one industry. I'm going to try to create a cross-industry, cross-recreation and community advocacy group that brings everyone who's concerned about land use to the table and knows that their rights or privileges are being affected by government decisions that are taken in secret. And sure enough, right after launching PLUS, we saw those same amendments for the Land Act that would give co-governance to First Nations come out in a new form. So it just went underground. Government started negotiating and releasing deals cut in the back room with First Nations over Crown land that would give them authority, co-governance or exclusive authority.
And when we talk about Crown land, we're talking about parks. We're talking about someone foraging for mushrooms we're talking about hunting, fishing. We're talking about off-roading. We're talking about we live in the great outdoors here in British Columbia, and 95% of the land is
Crown land.
Is Crown land.
And we can say that, but if you spend most of your time in the city and you go out and do a couple activities when you got free time, 95% of BC being Crown land doesn't mean a lot. But you're right. When what I hear from the public now through our group is how people use the land and find meaning in that use is diverse. It's important to them and their culture and their spirituality. And it does extend to foraging for mushrooms and berries, to conservation like hunting and fishing, but also bird watching, spirit bathing in forests, forest bathing, let alone motor vehicle usage like 4x4s and quads or trucks. Right. Yeah, everyone who wants to use the outdoors has to get there somehow. Mm-hmm. And as one of our supporting groups, the 4x4 Association of British Columbia says, or the Four-Wheel Drive Association of British Columbia, they'll say, look, if everyone who goes to recreate outdoors has to get there, and in most cases, that's with a 4x4 or a Subaru. So access matters, and then what you do on the land matters. And that's what Crown land means, is it's a place to resonate with the land and find meaning in people's lives. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's talk about who you are and your role as executive director. You created this society. Your background is in communications, public relations, and supporting public protection.
Yeah, I've worked most of my career, 15 years or more, in public service or public protection, which is for Crown corporations and regulators, usually regulating professionals or professional industries in the province. And my skill set and work was in communications, public relations, and issues management. So I worked with that public protection mandate, usually to inform and educate the public on their rights, things that matter to them and where they can find resources and do the work that they need to do, not the regulator, but they need to inform themselves on what their rights are and what their protection measures are, how to access them. And they need to do things like file complaints or seek information or read policy documents so they know how to, get on with business, working with professionals. Mm-hmm. So I know how government thinks about stakeholder engagement with the public, First Nations, and community groups, and ran those provincial campaigns in multiple different organizations, and saw over time quite a change in how the government wants to engage the public when it's got an objective in mind. And when the results from the public or stakeholders don't sound supportive of their objective, government finds ways to shorten the stakeholder engagement period, tighten up its language, and move its objective forward.
Or maybe not even tell the public.
Well, that happens too. And I was never a part of it, but I saw it all the time. And I know when government, for example, releases an announcement before a long weekend, that's to hide it. Bad news is released on Fridays, and stuff you didn't want to release but you have to goes before a long weekend. Mm-hmm. Now, my teams would never do that. Even when we needed to release on a Friday, we'd find ways not to do it because of the optics of being perceived as hiding something. Mm-hmm. So when I see government now release things like the Squamish Land Use Agreement before the Canada Day long weekend, a 100-page document, yeah. Well, that's by design. That's not by accident. And it's not like they went out of their way to advertise it. It was just a small little release with no fanfare that my team gets a hold of and goes, I guess we got to write an op-ed on our weekend, mm-hmm. Canada Day weekend, to get this out there. Mm-hmm. Now that helped inform this experience of mine in the past, the creation of Plus, and my objective, which is to take everything I learned working for the public interest and keep doing it, but use the skills and interests and understanding of government against them on these issues. Use my communication and issues management capabilities and get content in front of the media to then get in front of the public and help educate and inform them about decisions that are impacting their interests and their rights that they might not have heard about otherwise, because the government sure wasn't doing its job with a bunch of different agreements and issues that we'll talk about.
Mm-hmm. And what in a nutshell, and I have this down here is the Plus's mission is to ensure decisions about BC land are transparent, lawful, and made in the public interest. That sums it up. Pretty much.
Yeah. But let's just go over what that means. Okay. Transparent means the government shares with the public a couple things. Where it can, negotiations that are underway so that the public has insight and maybe input into the final outcome of a decision, agreement, policy document, etc. So the public should be made aware along the process, okay, or the journey of changing things in their interest. And then when that decision is done or agreement, that should be made aware to the public, not hidden behind a small release, if lucky, and before a long weekend. Now, the other one was that those decisions are lawful, because government could be transparent about everything. That doesn't mean what they're doing is lawful or fair. And then in the public interest, are the decisions they're making, even if lawful, are they in the public interest? Are they good decisions or bad decisions on the merit of what they do in the public interest? Legality and challenging things is for lawyers, right? But the public, of course, doesn't love all of the government decisions, even if they're all legal, even if they're all transparent. So those three spheres of concern are very important. And I've seen the government failing on all three with major decisions that I think are the most important and profound for the province right now around land use. Well, I don't mean about just going out and bird watching. I mean having authority and jurisdiction over the province, 95% of BC's crown land. If the government is abdicating authority to other groups that are not bound to act in the public interest, we start to have a real fracture of sovereignty in the province.
That's just problematic.
Where BC's sovereignty is at risk.
Yeah, there's no and it's important, and I want to stress this, that this is balancing Indigenous rights with public access. That's the goal. That is what we should be trying to attain. Okay,
I think that's at a minimum.
At a minimum. Yeah. At a minimum. And we touched on this a little bit prior to us beginning to roll here, that many people do not, the population does not pay attention to something until it affects them. And you began this organization prior to that, the decision that was made, and we'll talk, we can reference the Cowichan land ruling, but that your organization had already begun prior to that.
Well, let me touch on that.
Okay.
So First Nations in Canada have Aboriginal rights and title affirmed in the Constitution since 1982. Those are real, they're established, and how they're proven has also been expanded through court precedent. And I think it's fabulous to see this legal system working to support and affirm First Nations rights and title. Then we get into the concept of reconciliation by government and trying to own that word and that concept and say everything that they're doing, if it's to advance Aboriginal interests or rights, it's not necessarily in line with the Constitution. So you get a new nebulous concept that they're overlapping with constitutional rights. Now, this gets a bit complicated for the public. What's worse is the government does not go out of its way to explain this when they're hiding agreements. So when the public finds out about things that affect their land, whether it's private or public land, they get upset that they weren't told. And when they think that their rights are being infringed on. And that's not healthy for reconciliation, and that's the government's fault. They are setting reconciliation back years by not being transparent with the public about things that affect them. And the government's defense is we're doing it in the interest of First Nations. And that motive might be good, but the process and procedure and the outcome, I would argue, are flawed.
And it breeds contempt.
It does. And now no one would be happy finding out about things the way that they are when they could have been informed earlier. And everyone tries to say and pass the buck, we didn't have to tell you, judges said, like in the Cowichan case, we're not going to go inform homeowners who are affected by this decision. But the judge didn't stop the parties involved from going and telling homeowners. Nobody took responsibility. That's what harms reconciliation, right?
The stakes here, and we touched on this before, that 95% of British Columbia is Crown land, and I have in here that less than 55% is reasonably accessible, and that number's shrinking. But to reiterate the things that that are affected here, it's camping, hunting, fishing, hiking, snowmobiling, everything that you do outdoors.
Everything you might not do today. But I think of people in the city, because I left the city to go explore the outdoors more and move to a mountain town.
You moved to Trail.
I moved near Trail, yeah. I'm between Rosslyn and Trail in the village of Warfield.
I used to be at the Nelson Daily News.
There you go. So the West Kootenays is my home now. I don't like to think I live in any one village or town. I'm just in the West Kootenays.
In the West Kootenays. It's beautiful.
Now, British Columbians are similar. You might call Surrey home or White Rock, but you have access to the province. Everyone does, equally.
Yes.
And the use of Crown land is what you do today, but what you might do in the future. So when I had kids and started exploring parks more and thinking about the activities I wanted to do with them, I didn't have to be kayaking or hunting today to be worried about my ability to do it in the future. And that's the fabulous part, is how people connect with the land is going to change over their life. And people who work outdoors, like prospectors, loggers, and others, are probably going to want to retire and keep being outdoors and run a fishing lodge, right? Or a foraging group, or train kids up in scouts to be outside. And I really found from anyone who enjoys the land, their interests are not bound by one particular association or one interest. It's always expanding. And that's the magic of Crown land, right? It's something you engage with through your life and you find meaning. And it's always changing.
It is, Crown land too, it's foundational to our economy. And we can talk about this because we have natural resources.
We've got a few.
Yeah.
If you can access them, they become something that can contribute to the economy.
Precisely.
But if we do things like protect land through parking it, right? So the government has a 30 by 30 park initiative to protect.
What is that?
They want to protect 30% of the landmass for future generations by creating more parks and ensuring that you can't extract resources on that land. And so the concept is we'll park a bunch of land and maintain it. You won't be able to log it. You won't be able to explore for minerals. And different organizations like the Association of Mineral Exploration.
When was this implemented? When did?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the 30 by 30 initiative is in federal and provincial mandates. And both governments have committed to protect 30% of the land base, land and sea.
Okay, me being the dummy, when did this?
A few years ago. It used to be by 2025, and then it expanded to 30 by 30. And it sounds noble. We should protect the land for future generations. But the Association of Mineral Exploration in British Columbia looked at this and went, we think more than 30% is already protected based on current guidelines, where you can't log or explore for minerals, or caribou and other animals are protected. So it becomes an issue of definition, right? What are we talking about when we say protect the land? Now, that concept matters because I think we can't even agree on what protection is. Industry groups are worried that parking more of BC will limit exploration and resource extraction and the contribution to the GDP of the province. Now, I think all your listeners can appreciate when hospitals are closing on weekends and we have an inflation crisis and a poor economy in the province, we need to increase revenue. And a lot of that is going to come from resource extraction and industry work on Crown land. So when we're conflictingly saying we want to protect Crown land from that, well, where are we going to generate more revenue to deal with the problems of affordability? That's the question that industry associations and others are grappling with, and that Public Land Use Society is concerned about as well.
Now we can, if you're ready to get into how the Cowichan land ruling, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but unwittingly, the Public Land Use Society became this aggregator of all of these groups that, like there was this wanton desire, or not desire, or need for an organization to kind of bring all these groups together. Well, am I correct in saying that? Because there was no, okay, this happens, that happens, and then everybody goes, holy shit.
That court decision was one of the biggest decisions impacting British Columbians, arguably in
our
decades.
lifetime. Yeah.
And it's going to affect people into the future. And this concept of what affects you today, you might not be a homeowner today, but you might be in the future or striving towards it. Or the property you rent is going to be from someone who owns a home. So there's always downstream impacts. But imagine last year on this story, Public Land Use Societies out in summer trying to keep up with all of these land use agreements that are coming out or that we're finding out are being negotiated in secret, and share with the public the implications about it on their interests and on their behalf. And we're out. And then towards the end of summer, this decision comes in on Cowichan at the Supreme Court level.
519 pages.
Yeah. And it's a case that's been going on for 10 years that most people hadn't heard about.
Yeah.
No one's going to read that whole decision.
No.
And legal experts and others start opining on it and talking to us going, wow, this affects not just Crown land, but this affects private property anywhere that there's Aboriginal title and private property or fee simple title in the province. That's only in a couple spots. Okay. Haida Gwaii, notably, and now in Richmond, where you have Aboriginal title and fee simple title existing at the same time. And Justice Young saying that the protections offered under the Land Act for fee simple title do not apply when there's Aboriginal title. So Tom Isaac, your previous guest, had said, well, how can you convey the exclusive use and occupation of land to two groups at the same time, right? That can't work. Now, for Public Land Use Society, this comes out and we start digging into what this means. And I saw no groups talking about it, and groups asking us if we could deploy legal experts to speak to their boards or city councils about the implications. And that's where you just find that you've got a society talking about land use, and it now extends into private land and private land interests. And that's not something like on behalf of owners. It's on behalf of British Columbians, because we need that certainty on our land base. And as Tom Isaac had said about having indefeasible title that you can take to the bank and get a mortgage on. Well, that's no longer the case when the government has to backstop those properties now with
which our premier has come out and said he's going to do in Richmond. He's going to do the same thing in Kamloops.
So Kamloops is a city that is, as we found out, claimed by First Nations in court, where they're seeking Aboriginal title over the city. And we don't know where else in the province First Nations are seeking Aboriginal title in the courts, because the government won't acknowledge that. It could be everywhere. And so that leads to an uncertainty. Whatever the outcome in an appeal court decision about is Aboriginal title exclusive, can both exist at the same time, the outcomes are probably fluid right now. But the uncertainty exists for banks and lenders today, and for people who want to buy.
That's right.
And now are concerned about the certainty of British Columbia. And so Public Land Use Society has been talking about not this justice decision and getting into the weeds, but on the implications of it for people and what the messaging is. Do we have surety in the future? Is government putting its best case forward to defend private property interests? And government at all levels, federal, provincial, municipal. And when we don't see that happen, we just try to inform the public about what's happening.
Your organization's interaction, obviously I would imagine that you've had interaction with the provincial government.
No. No? I mean, we have in the sense. So we've sent media questions to government, freedom of information requests. Often we don't get a response. And I don't think engaging the government to ask for information is worth our time when we get obfuscated responses back, if anything. I'll go down a rabbit hole here.
Okay.
So a lot of these decisions we're concerned about that affect the land and governance in the province, authority, where authority rests. Is it with our provincial government or other groups? That's a fundamental question we like to explore. Now, if you were to ask the government in a freedom of information request for anything to do with these land use decisions, you'll not get a response from them, because they will say that it's privileged, and so we can't discuss ongoing negotiations. And for anything final, they'll say that if it contains Indigenous knowledge or anything that would expose or harm the culture or information and data sovereignty of First Nations or be harmful to reconciliation, we can't release that information either. So government basically holds anything to do with Indigenous relations back from being shared with the public. And so you can do as many FOI requests as you want to government about all of these things that impact our interests, the public interests. You won't get any response. Sorry to be a downer. This also applies at the federal level. The access to information requests that are submitted to federal departments are aligned in a similar way. And this comes from UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Both the federal government and the provincial government have committed to support those principles through different legislation. In BC, it's called DRIPA. Under that, there's definitions of concepts like Indigenous knowledge and data sovereignty, which must be protected. And anything that's harmful to reconciliation must not be shared publicly.
But we can't even define reconciliation.
No, and you can't know all of the knowledge impacting public interest in governance changes and policy. It can't be shared through the government through freedom of information requests. You couldn't know it even if it was shared with you, because Indigenous knowledge is now defined as knowledge that belongs to groups. And so it can't be shared outside of that group or sometimes outside of that language. It can't be translated. It can't be understood by others.
Is that law?
That is being enforced through law right now. And here's an example, is the hunting and trapping regulations have proposed amendments that are out today that the government is seeking public input on. And all listeners interested should participate and give their input. Now, those proposed changes to conservation and public governance policy and law are informed by Indigenous knowledge, as it says on the government's website. But Indigenous knowledge, as it's defined, is not something that we can know and can't be shared with us. And so there you have a concept of this sort of metaphysical, spiritual concept, as it's defined, informing public governance and policy that those who it impacts cannot know and have access to. And that's a problem for democracy and transparency and having accountability, where information guiding decisions that affect the public should be made available to the public and those that are impacted. And that's not the case right now. And it is all legislation and policy is now aligned with these concepts because of UNDRIP, both federally and provincially.
And, correct me if I'm wrong here. Like the court's job is to interpret the law, correct? Is that correct?
Yeah, sure.
And government's job is to write law, like to pass legislation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for our premier or our provincial government to blame the courts for interpreting something that they implemented is insane.
Well, that's right. The courts have a role here, of course. The government in British Columbia said we want to stay out of the courts. We want to negotiate with anyone, business, First Nations, so that we don't go to court. That sounds noble. But the courts are a level of government that are important, and they're there to protect the public interest.
Mm-hmm.
And their interpretation of things can be appealed, and you can go up multiple levels. But trying to keep things out of the courts doesn't make it more democratic. It doesn't mean that what the premier is saying, let's say about negotiations with First Nations to create land use agreements, such as the Squamish agreement that they did. That didn't go to court. That was negotiated.
Explain that.
Okay. The government is negotiating land use agreements with First Nations throughout BC. That gives co-governance or authority to First Nations over territory that they claim.
In secrecy?
Well, they're negotiated and you can't see what's happening. Or they could be negotiating and the public might not know where.
Okay.
Now, the government's doing that because they want to stay out of the courts. Well, that's because some First Nations might want to go to court to seek Aboriginal title over their claimed territory. So government says we don't want to go to court and duke it out because we might lose. So we'll negotiate a deal. But how is that more democratic for the public interest? These aren't deals that are done in the legislature. These are done between the government of today and, let's say, a First Nation group that the public is not informed about or aware of or has input into. Sometimes the public has input into short stakeholder engagement sessions, but not always. And so the claim that we're negotiating and this is good for reconciliation doesn't mean it's good for the public interest, or that the broad government and the opposition in the legislature are aware. And that's where there's just lots of confusion and concern, right? And I go back to this court issue. There's nothing wrong with going to court. Everyone does it. That's a tool for us and the public. And government has the right to appeal decisions it doesn't agree with. And is the government appealing decisions on the public interest? It has shown that it does not have the appetite for it. It will implement the law as guided by a judge in a decision when it could appeal.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about specifically relating to the Public Land Use Society, and there's specific cases that have come up, and let's talk a little bit about those issues, those with specific nations that have taken place or that have come to the forefront that have been areas of concern. And like there are, they deal with, remote undeveloped land. There's all kinds of things. These things are done. You find out about them after.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about
that.
Let's talk about where there are not agreements in place.
Okay.
And we'll circle back to this United Nations declaration.
Okay.
First Nations in BC claim territory. All of the provinces claimed. Now, that doesn't mean that there's Aboriginal title under the Constitution, right? Aboriginal title comes from, let's say, a legal decision in court, like in Cowichan, where the nation makes a claim for title, puts forward evidence of occupation, and tries to prove that title. And in the case in Richmond, the Cowichan tribe won the case. They didn't get everything that they claimed, but they got Aboriginal title over a portion of Richmond. That's one way to get title. But other First Nations claim that area as well. So they don't have title. All of BC is claimed. All of BC could be said to be unceded territory. That doesn't mean that there's Aboriginal rights and title under the Constitution everywhere, just because there's a claim. But government has introduced this United Nations Declaration and its principles throughout the province via DRIPA. And DRIPA says what you claim, you own, and all the resources on that land. And it doesn't define what it is to claim land. It just says you say it's yours and it is. There's no test to evaluate the strength of that claim or scrutiny of it. So it might be easy for government to look at that and go, when there's one big First Nation that we can deal with, we'll negotiate an agreement. We'll negotiate not Aboriginal title, but a land use agreement that gives authority over the land and the ability to control access to the land or have certain rights and jurisdiction. That's not Aboriginal title. And that's easy to do. It's easy to negotiate agreements when you have one First Nation to deal with. What about when you have 5 nations that overlap on one territory?
And they're all claiming it.
Or 20 First Nations overlapping some parts of the province that all claim the exclusive use and occupation of that land for themselves. How do you negotiate now? What does DRIPA say when 20 groups claim that land? Do all 20 own it and all the resources? Are they able to manage that land? DRIPA says that there's a principle of requiring free, prior, and informed consent by those First Nations before anything happens on that land. You need that First Nation consent. Again, that's easy to seek by the government of British Columbia when there's one nation. You can create free, prior, and informed consent through a land use agreement with them and then stamp it as done and publish it to the public on Canada Day long weekend so nobody reads it. But what about when there's 20 groups? It's a little bit harder. Now let's step back. What about where there is no Aboriginal title, there's no treaty, there's no land use agreement at all, there's just a claim to land? What now? Well, government allowed Joffrey Lakes Park to be closed in the summer last year for over 100 days by a First Nation claiming, or a couple nations claiming that land. But they didn't have an agreement with the government. That was ironed out. They didn't have Aboriginal title. And when that was allowed to occur at Joffrey Lakes, the thought expands to BC. Could this happen anywhere? Could highways be shut down? What about concepts like airspace or marine travel? All foreshore in British Columbia is Crown land. Navigable waters are claimed by First Nations too. So is the airspace. This gets a little broad and dark all of a sudden. Where is the clarity and certainty on this?
These things all they're concerning. They're concerning to say the least. I hearken back to, no one seems to care until it affects them. When they take their fishing rod or their gun or whatever it is, and they're going to go hunting or they're going to go shoot, whatever they're going to do, or they're going to go kayaking or whatever, and then they find out that the park's closed or they don't have access to it. And it's not like that hasn't happened. You just explained a situation that it did.
I'll fire off a few examples of where this happens.
Okay.
Throughout BC, and I don't need to name groups or territories. I would just say throughout BC, there are foragers who pick mushrooms and berries. And different First Nations throughout the province are saying, we don't want anyone coming into our claimed territory. It's not their Aboriginal title land. It's just claimed.
Just claim it.
It's not their reserve land either. They could bar people from entering a reserve. But they will claim a territory and say, we don't want anyone coming in to pick berries or hunt or fish or pick mushrooms. Well, that's Otherwise, Crown land, that's public land, owned by the province of British Columbia. So now you have a claim that a First Nation owns the land. And DRIPA seems to support that they do. Now, there might be a negotiation for an agreement underway, but it's not ironed out yet. So now there's that authority question. Can First Nations block access to public land in the province? First Nations are empowered to do so by DRIPA. Who wouldn't? If what they claim they own, of course they're going to seek this. But this is not good for reconciliation, even between First Nations, because now there's overlapping claims. And nations are suing the government for giving preference to one nation over the other and giving rights and authority and access control to some nations and not others. So nations are pitted against each other. The test for the strength of claim isn't going to happen in courts because government doesn't want to do that. They want to negotiate deals. And it sounds like they are starting with the biggest and most powerful nations first, where there's only one claim, and then the other claims are easy to dismiss. And First Nations, by the way, are suing the government on multiple accounts because of this right now. Now, let's go back to access for berry picking and fishing and hunting, park access. This is happening everywhere in BC, and Plus is hearing about it from different groups, being told that they can't quad or truck on Forest Service roads, foragers can't pick mushrooms in the forest, fishermen on the Skeena River can't fish because there's an annual ban by the First Nations up north for any fishing on their territory. And they threaten to seize people's vehicles and gear through their band police if you fish in the Skeena River. And every year the government has to put out a release that says we are the only authority to issue a fishing license. And if you have a license, you are allowed to fish. But if you encounter trouble, call the RCMP. So this real authoritative jurisdictional conflict is already here. And it's more than brewing, it's boiling. And it's going to boil over anytime now. And that's a major risk that the province has taken on, that industry, recreation, and community groups are at the forefront in BC encountering and trying to navigate and seek clarity on. And they're not getting clarity because there's more than one authority in the province now.
And you're traveling the province. You're hearing there's groups. It's becoming I'll suggest, because it's in the news. And it is, once again, I'll say this again, it's affecting British Columbians now.
It's affecting people and communities.
Yes.
And those people have representatives through recreation associations or elected officials, community groups. Plus is asked to go speak to a lot of them and inform them so that they can take this information back to their members or their communities and share it. But the invitations often come from an individual saying, I heard about your site, or I read an article in the media by you or one of your directors, and I'm concerned. And so every week Plus hears from people throughout BC concerned about their docks, their ability to travel on a boat or by road. Lots of different stories. It's unbelievable, Stephen, how much we're hearing from people who don't know that their interests and concerns are shared by other groups. They all think they're isolated, and they're worrying that their concerns are unique to them. So Plus has put together a map and goes, what you're saying over here is shared by people on the coast and upland in BC and everywhere. All the same interests and concerns that nobody knows is shared between each other.
The recourse for British Columbians, obviously you're going to say, contact your local MLA.
I can do better than that.
Okay.
Here's a thought. I used to manage public communications in the federal government, where people would send in letters and we would disperse it to the right department or person and craft a response. Anyone who submits a form letter, those are not counted. So if we got 400 form letters, which is an auto-filled letter that you just sign or put your name on, we get those in, I would track how many we got. 400, 1,000 if it was really good campaign. Nobody cared. It didn't get tallied up anywhere. What mattered were individually crafted letters that posed good questions, that were not big indictments of government decision in all caps, speaking from positions of authority or how many generations someone had been in the country. fun to read, but not informative. And we didn't get a lot of content either. Social media was coming out and being more active when I was in government, and people left their comments in the public forum instead. I would say there's a role for letters, especially from representative groups to government. I never found it to be that powerful in compelling decision makers to reconsider their decisions. That's why Plus hasn't said, please write the government. We make it available on our website to find your MLA based on where you are. What I think is better is the public needs to be better informed, and the burden falls on the public to inform themselves, not on government to inform them. Government's job is to put a bulletin up and say, we made the information available. And you could ask how many people read it, and they go, I don't know, 5. Doesn't matter. Our job is not to ensure everyone read it. Ours is to make it available. The burden falls on the public to inform themselves about decisions that might impact them and what their responsibilities are as well. And so an informed public has to participate and give feedback when it's asked in surveys. Now, here's the challenge, are those surveys broadcast by the government so that the public are really made aware? No. I've seen surveys the government released that were not made public or put online. They were shared with a couple interest groups only, and the public had no idea until Plus found out, raised it with the government, and the government had to apologize in the legislature for rolling out secretive stakeholder engagement processes that they didn't share with the public. So this burden on the public is tough. I'm not saying it's easy for them, but that's the great part about your show, this is one more channel, right? One more opportunity, not behind a paywall, for the public to engage with and learn, or follow Public Land Use Society on our website. And if they register for our newsletter, we just sum up a bunch of news every 3 or 4 weeks and distribute it to our followers.
Since the onslaught of this whole discussion around public land use, and ties in with the Cowichan land ruling, I would imagine that you've seen an uptake in interest in what you're, to put it mildly.
Yeah, from both interests, private property concerns, and not just from owners, like I said, from those who know that having a sound private property system, an indefeasible title in the province, gives credibility to our province as an investable place where you can buy property, you know that it's secure, and you have sound governance and jurisdiction across the province. Now, that's private property, and then you have the same concerns about jurisdiction and governance on public land. And is it clear who's in control of BC's lands? It's not clear. That's obvious.
And that has to affect mining, exploration, all of those kinds of things that are the economic engine of our province.
Yeah, and not everyone can follow all those industries, but they feel it in their pocketbook and in the dinner table discussions around inflation. And trying to understand that concept and why their money isn't going as far as it used to. They probably have less time to enjoy the outdoors, most British Columbians, because they got to work more. And they're being squeezed into smaller homes while thinking about, can we afford to have kids? And so I really appreciate the challenge of competing with all the other information out there through all the different channels that are available. There's more information available to the public than ever before, certainly in the last 10 years, through more mediums like podcasts, in print, on digital and social media, and still television and radio. And look at what happened in Cowichan. A bunch of homeowners, hundreds of them, were impacted by a title decision that the court didn't tell them about. The province, the municipality, and the federal government and the First Nations involved didn't tell them about, and they could have.
They got a letter from the mayor.
So even the media that was targeting them, saying homeowners in Richmond are impacted by this title decision, they didn't know, because when they showed up at that town hall that I attended, hosted by the mayor of Richmond, back in November, I think, homeowners went up and said, I didn't know about this till I got a letter in the mail, a physical letter. And that was a profound moment for me, and I think for you and your listeners.
Scare the shit out of you.
People are only finding out about things, even when the media and algorithms are targeting them digitally, they're still not aware. They're too busy, or they're not watching the news anymore. So there's a lot of power to be said about giving someone a letter. That doesn't mean we need to stop having shows like this and going out and writing articles. But it showed to me anyway that it's really hard to reach the public. And only, like you said, when things impact them do they start to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary and doesn't encourage me, except that's why we're here right now having this talk, is to help.
We talked a little bit about DRIPA and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the BC Ledge. They basically embrace this. The intention was to advance reconciliation and recognize Indigenous rights, and we still don't know what reconciliation means. Like, what does that even mean?
I think we know less now than we did a few years ago, because if reconciliation means that the government can proceed with backroom deals and negotiations for agreements with First Nations without informing the public, if that's reconciliation, the public's not going to tolerate it. And that's now harmful to it. So maybe we need to decouple reconciliation from the government's concept of protecting Indigenous knowledge and doing things in secret. Reconciliation should be something that brings the public along, that they contribute to and they're informed of along the way.
And eventually could buy into.
That's right. And government has said in the last couple of weeks, the Premier said, reconciliation is a government-to-government undertaking. It includes the federal government, provincial government, and First Nation governments. It's not for the courts. Well, I'm sorry, where's the public in this discussion of reconciliation? I thought we all have a role to play in reconciliation and being informed. And nobody likes being informed about things that have a negative consequence on them only after the fact. And remember, the government's been caught out having to apologize for half-baked stakeholder engagement sessions or proposed changes to law that they didn't share with the public. And they go, oops, we got caught. We're sorry. We'll be more transparent in the future. But it keeps happening. And now you have a pattern. And from pattern, you can ascribe intention, that the government doesn't want to inform people about this stuff, maybe because it's not in the public interest. And so we need to take back whatever reconciliation is, maybe redefine it or seize it from the government and say, we have a new concept for it, and it cannot be founded on secrecy.
Mm-hmm. And the government is on record as saying that DRIPA would not override existing laws.
Well, from the moment of its creation,
that's a contradiction.
That's what its intention was, and now it's in the law through an appeal court decision that came down in December that requires all provincial law align with DRIPA. So what that decision did in December is say, not that right now all laws must align with DRIPA. It said this is a judiciable issue, which means any group could take a law of British Columbia that's not aligned with this United Nations declaration and bring it to court. And that's why the Premier is saying we need to amend DRIPA to make sure that we don't go to court on everything, because no laws in British Columbia are aligned with DRIPA. It's a United Nations voluntary declaration.
Exactly.
How it was never meant to be put in law. And are BC's laws aligned with it? No. When a wastewater treatment facility needs to be built, is that in line with free, prior, and informed consent of the nations that claim that territory?
No.
Is there a mechanism that's been created? No, it doesn't exist. It could not exist everywhere. All laws. So the Premier is rapidly going to put forward their proposed amendments to keep it out of the courts. Sorry to depress you, Stephen. There's a lot underway right now. You know, this is a fluid, dynamic time, and we're all trying to make the most of it.
At the end of the day, okay, we talked about specific examples of things that and I harp on this. And I'm not prepared. I'm not one to stand back and trust the process. I'm not going to. I'm not. And I don't, because history shows that when you stand back and go, okay, well, everything will be looked at, it'll be fine. We have examples where that hasn't worked out.
We have a few thousand years of examples where people abdicate their responsibility to others to act in their interest. It doesn't go well.
It doesn't go well.
Yeah.
So let's reiterate. Well, first of all, before we get into that, let's talk about there's some issues here that I have examples of DRIPA in action.
Mm-hmm.
You referenced a few, but there are more. Let's talk about those specific examples of DRIPA in action.
There's a lot, and I had covered already that what you claim you own, you have authority over it purportedly, and the conflict of, well, that hasn't been proven. You might have overlapping claims. Let's look at one example because there's so many. A First Nation up north had claimed airspace, control of its airspace over its territory. Okay, now this Indigenous group was, I think, a self-described clan that claimed authority over its airspace, okay, authority and jurisdiction over it. And a helicopter pilot engaged Plus and said, I was on a charter flight with government workers and we were threatened mid-flight with action by that Indigenous group. And it continued until they had landed on the ground. And they got a letter afterwards from that group to the helicopter operator saying, this is our airspace and our land. And if you don't seek permission before you enter our airspace, it could put you at risk because we're going to be flying drones and operating things here.
Down?
No, but just we control our airspace and we might be operating drones here and you don't have permission to enter this airspace. Well, that's profound, that statement, because the helicopter operator said, only the military can tell me where I can't fly in Canada. Okay, that's it. And Transport Canada, the federal authority, the Department of Transport, sets the guidelines and rules and regulations for all of this. It's not provincial.
Even for drones.
Even for drones. And so here you have a group saying you can't enter our airspace. Well, the pilot said, that's not true. So Plus sent a letter to the Transport Canada asking them to clarify and confirm. Do First Nations have the ability to bar entry of chartered flight operators from claimed airspace? Because that nation doesn't have Aboriginal title there, or that group doesn't have Aboriginal title, but they have a claimed area. Now, under DRIPA, they seem to own that land. Does that ownership and authority over it extend into the air? Well, several months later, we got a response back from Transport Canada that said, no, they do not have the ability to bar entry, even if they had Aboriginal title. The federal government is the sole authority, and First Nations cannot bar people from entering Crown land or public land airspace or landing on that territory as well. You can land a helicopter anywhere on public land in BC that it's safe and permissible to do so. So that was a case where that group was empowered by the rights and privileges afforded through DRIPA, not through the Constitution, not through existing law, okay, but through DRIPA. That's an example of how DRIPA is unfolding throughout BC everywhere. And it's not clear to me who's in control of BC's lands when the provincial government will not backstop its own authority and say, we are the sole authority in all cases. They didn't do it at Joffrey Lakes. They're not doing it elsewhere. They're asking people to respect First Nations interests when First Nations try to bar people from entering land. That's confusing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I have in my notes here, and I'm probably not saying it like properly, the Gitaxla ruling.
Gitgatla, yeah.
I'm sorry for butchering that.
It's not phonetic when you read it, so it's tough.
Okay, let's talk. What is that all about here? The automatic registration of mineral claims online violates duty to consult First Nations under DRIPA. Tell us about that ruling.
Yeah, I'll try to speed through it because it's a complex concept here. And I touched a bit on the outcome. Mm-hmm. So the Gitgatla had said in a court case a couple of years ago, when mineral claims are made in British Columbia by prospectors or claim stakers, they do it online. They get to stake an area of land that they then go explore. And the Gitgatla said, we need to be consulted and you need our consent before those claims are registered and issued to the claim staker, because we're a First Nation with rights and interests. And under DRIPA, we need free, prior, and informed consent. Now, the province of British Columbia, the government, said, No, DRIPA is not not required. It's an aspiration. We don't need to seek free, prior, informed consent. So you had a little conflict there. It goes to court, and the judge says, I believe it was Justice Ross says, no, you need First Nations to be consulted before a mineral claim is issued. Okay? So now we've recreated the mineral claims consultation framework in British Columbia. We've ended what was called free mining, where any prospector could go around the land and stake a claim. Now you need to consult with First Nations before that claim is issued. Government is doing that now because the duty to consult is held by the Crown. So when a claim is made under the new system, the government committed to 120 days to consult First Nations and then determine if the claim will be issued to the claim staker. Now, the average time it's taken since the system has come out is well beyond 120 days. So the system is already not functioning as it was intended because it's complex. When a claim staker claims land, that's held maybe by 20 First Nations. Government has to engage all 20 and consult with them. Okay, so the Gitgala appealed that decision and said, that's great, but we didn't want just consultation. We wanted consent. You need to seek our consent before a claim is issued because that's what DRIPA says, free, prior, informed consent. And the government committed to DRIPA. So how can the government say that we put DRIPA in place and want to align all laws with DRIPA, but it's also just aspirational and we don't want to be forced to do it? So the appeal judge, or there were several judges involved in a split decision, but the outcome of that decision in short was we need to align all laws in British Columbia with DRIPA. The argument was sound. So in this case, they didn't say that consent is needed before a claim is authorized. They took a broader lens to it and said, the argument is sound, all laws need to align with DRIPA. So that's where we are today, is the government, the premier is looking at, well, how do we avoid that now that it's a judiciable issue? So we better amend DRIPA as fast as we can so that it doesn't require going to court all the time.
Is this on the agenda? They're sitting in February. They sit in February, or is it?
I believe so. They've said this week, the premier has said these amendments are being crafted now. They're not open to the public, which makes sense. They're being drafted. We'll see what they are. And First Nation leaders in the province are saying we don't want to see any amendments to DRIPA, let alone see DRIPA repealed, as others are calling for, like PLUS.
And all this feeds into uncertainty, lack of economic activity. Why would a company that's into mineral exploration or extract our natural, why would they
deploy money
exactly.
to a jurisdiction where the rules aren't clear?
That's right. Exactly.
The authority over the land is in question. The government seems to be abdicating its authority and role to other groups that are not bound to act in the public interest. So sure enough, some industry can go abroad. You can go look for minerals in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Might be an easier jurisdiction.
Wherever.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And all that means is no one's looking for it in British Columbia. It's evident because under the new claim staking system that we had just discussed, there's a 60% reduction in the area of land staked in British Columbia in the last 6 months compared to the 7-year average. So that means there's only small little claims are being filed. The total area of claimed land in BC for mineral exploration, where people are going to go look for the next mine to support mining and our GDP, is being reduced. Well, those explorers are going to other jurisdictions, other friendlier jurisdictions with more certainty. But Stephen, some industry cannot leave British Columbia, right? They are bound here with cattle, trees, established plants.
Well, I even saw, I did read, it's good that you brought that up because I did read an article about the Canadian, or the BC Cattle Federation, the
Cattlemen's
Association. Yeah. They're going, well, what the hell's happening here?
Where do we go?
We
can't go, go to Mexico
that's right.
Look for silver in the hills.
We raise our cattle on Crown land.
That's right. So with that uncertainty, we enter a predicament, don't we? Of Are you going to deploy more capital to expand your business or maintain it, or look at winding things down and exiting? That's not what British Columbians need when we scale this back from this complex topic of authority and jurisdiction to dinner table topics of affordability, right? And having a province that's investable. We all want that certainty. Mm-hmm. And when we don't have it, people get jittery. And people with money too, anyone goes, if I have limited money that's being reduced, maybe I can go to another province or another country and I'll get more bang for my buck. Mm-hmm. Well, British Columbia is notoriously expensive with long wait times and closing hospitals and a whole slew of issues where suddenly access to the backcountry becomes the last priority for British Columbians. Mm-hmm. But it's funny that access and certainty in the land base is actually what's driving people to not be able to use that land anymore and focus on other things.
Very somber conversation here.
I started the talk talking about the threat to British Columbia's sovereignty. You know, it's a serious, profound topic.
I look at specific real world, real life things. You know, let's just say I own a business on pick a lake and I'm renting out kayaks. That's my livelihood, right? And then one day I'm told that I can't have access to my dock, or I'm not being facetious when I say that.
Oh, I've got examples of this.
Okay.
So let's go over what Public Land Use Society is hearing from the public. All foreshore, which is the area of land between low and high tide, let's say, is Crown land. Even if you own a property on a beach and you have a dock, that foreshore is Crown land, which is claimed by First Nations. Okay. Government is underway negotiating with First Nations here and there, where First Nations want authority over their claimed territory to manage it as they see fit. Now, you can own your property, but your dock is on Crown land. It's in the water. And so dock licensing becomes something that's subject to decisions by First Nations. Floating homes are on Crown land. They're on the water. And so you can own that home, but you need a license to occupy it. And if First Nations don't want homes on their claimed territory and government wants to negotiate deals with them, government is already starting to say down in the Tawasin area, all floating homes are, what you've got is it. There's no more new licenses being issued for float homes. And those that have licenses are not getting them renewed for years at a time. Some of them are getting them renewed month to month. And it seems like the government is squeezing out people using that Crown land water for dock use or floating homes. And what do you think happens to those homeowners when they need to get a renewed mortgage? Well, the bank says, wait a minute, the government's not issuing any new float home licenses and you're not getting renewed 10 years at a time, you're month to month. Well, this whole thing is coming to an end. It's getting wound down. So why would I give a mortgage to you or insure your floating home when next month you might have to ship it off somewhere else in the province? So there's bona fide examples of people using Crown land related to their homes and their property. Your property rights might be protected, maybe, but it doesn't mean your property value is not impacted by decisions taken on Crown land. And let's not forget all of the coastal owners who have docks, whose property value is tied to their dock access and their boats and their ability to recreate and transit in the area.
So we've covered quite a bit here, and I would like to sum it up here, and because we could talk for hours about this, because but I want you to reiterate what those that are watching this, those that are listening to it. I don't want to be a negative Nelly here. I do want to put a positive spin on this, because as when Thomas was on here too, and one of the things, and he was fantastic doing it too. What our government has done is create a scenario where it's confrontational. Like, it's very easy to blame the Indigenous people for this. It is not their fault.
This is only the government's fault and responsibility to communicate openly with the public about decisions taken in their interest. And the public needs to divert all of their concern to the government, not First Nations. And First Nations also are forced to conflict with each other due to the uncertainty that DRIPA has created in the province. And Plus has said at numerous engagements, the target of all of our concern is on government, because they're the policymakers, they're the decision makers, and who are accountable to the public. Industry groups, proponents, First Nations, community groups, no, they're all trying to navigate this system, and are told conflicting things by the government.
Mm-hmm. So people that are listening to this or watching it, if they want to, we've covered a lot here in a brief period of time, but if people wanted to reach out to your organization, your URL is
publiclanduse.ca.
publiclanduse.ca. Subscribe to the newsletter.
That's right. And we don't send more than one every 3 weeks, but we do a roundup of information and articles and podcast interviews like this to our subscribers, and try to compete with all the other subscriptions they have. But our main goal is just continue to engage article and interview by interview, and hope that we reach a broader audience. And if they subscribe, great. They can get informed about what they missed. They can see the work that we're doing, because we had more than 50 engagements last year and articles, which is a lot. It's more than I ever did in all the Crown corporations I worked for combined. And so the media is hungry to get information about this topic. People want to hear it. And the reason I think that we're finding so many channels like this and conversations happening is because there's more uncertainty than there was before. When there's a lot of certainty, people are busy enjoying their lives, spending their money and recreating. When there's uncertainty, it often accompanies economic strife. Because like we said, uncertainty does not support a healthy economy and investment in the province. And so it's not just a symptom of it, it's the cause of it. And you see more conversations happening, more people talking. But then there's so much information out there. And I appreciate this opportunity to have a discussion. It's a conversation. We can move around different topics. It's not linear. And I think that's what we're seeing, is these are complex things to talk about. And we need more conversation, more debate, and more scrutiny on the decisions, which government is right now notorious for trying to avoid.
Okay. Well, on that note, Warren, I'd like to thank you for taking time to come to the studio today here. And once again, I want to reiterate this, that we can't trust the process. We have to become educated, and by becoming educated, we become involved in it. And we don't want it to get to a point where, you and your family decide to go on a camping trip and you reserved a space at a park, and then you find out that you can't access it. Or you want to go fishing with your son or whatever. There's a plethora of things that can occur, that can happen. You want to go for a walk, like those kinds of things. And I'm not suggesting that we're in that dire of a situation right now. But the one thing I certainly know, and I'll bring this up, especially with COVID, you didn't think it could get worse, and then it did. And it can continue to get worse if nobody stands up and says, and I say, no, you have to become more educated about what's happening.
We all have access to the same knowledge and information, and it's our duty to inform ourselves. But government tries to avoid that scrutiny and privilege some knowledge and information for select groups while making decisions for the public interest with it. And so you can participate in the conversation, follow Public Land Use Society and Ship of Fools, but tell others to just read, engage with podcasts and interviews and share information. And know that other groups aren't going to do it for you. You've got to do it yourself, and scrutinize and argue and engage with us and challenge us and our views openly on the merit of what we say. And we're happy to engage and go to community groups, write more articles, or have debates that we really see a lack of in British Columbia these days. And like your comment about COVID, anytime the government wants to withhold information because they think they know better than you, you can tell right away that something's wrong and that you need to do a little more to stay informed.
And we're not fear-mongering here. We're not.
No, I'm positive about all of this.
That's right. We're not fear-mongering.
The public's hungry for this.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And we have to hold, and I think the masses have to hold our government to account. And there is a way to do that. We know we can do it.
Yeah.
But like you said, the onus is on the individual British Columbians to educate themselves on this, but also part and parcel of what I'm attempting to do here too, by having you on here, is to talk about it and hopefully shed some light on it, get more people involved, understand, because once you do understand what it is, it is pretty simple to understand.
And have people on, and we should all be engaging with those who we disagree with.
Yes.
We don't have to agree about everything.
That's correct.
And we keep being told that. And that if we don't agree with a concept of reconciliation or something, that it's disrespectful or that we're not going to entertain a conversation anymore.
But how can we even agree when we don't understand? What does reconciliation mean?
Well, that's right. Can we talk about it?
Yeah, exactly.
Does it need to include all of this secrecy?
Yeah.
So I'm positive on this, Stephen, because the public has a hunger for information and knowledge that's not, privileged for a select few to help inform their decisions. And I think they want to disagree. They need the environment to feel comfortable doing it, that they won't be canceled for saying something. They don't want to be forced underground with opinions and thoughts where they brew and stew and become sour. These should be discussed publicly in a public space. And plus, assured taking a road, talking about it in the media everywhere we can, and found it resonates with people throughout BC.
We've certainly found that out.
And we'll keep doing it.
Okay. On that note, Warren, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Steve.
I appreciate you.
Great to join you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
You may be asking yourself, what's any of this got to do with me? Absolutely nothing. Until next time.